everybody, and welcome to the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christian Cutluck.
And today on the podcast, we're going to start a new feature called Dissecting Fiction Goes to Disney, in this case, World, where we're going to talk about the, I would say, plethora of media based around the Disney parks. That's a good way to say it, instead of just saying that it was a big advertisement for the parks, right?
Yeah, we looked up a whole list of these, and there's a whole timeline of them. And I think it's notable to point out that most of them were from the late 80s and early to mid 90s. And since then, they kind of oddly died out a bit.
Yeah, they are occasional still, and we're definitely going to get into those until later episodes. But this is a big Eisner initiative that starts out of trying to make the parks cooler and using sort of all of the media force that Disney has to do that. I think rather successfully. We'll save the specifics for another episode. There are a couple of things before this. There is one sitcom before this that'll definitely be an episode, which is notable because almost all of the sitcom appearances were on ABC, which makes sense as it is owned by Disney. The other one that precedes this episode by about 3 months is not on a Disney network when it originally airs. We'll get back to that. But this episode that we're going to talk about, or a two-part episode, we should say, is Full House, The House Meets the Mouse, parts 1 and 2, airing as episodes 23 and 24 of season 6 of Full House. Full House pretty much at the height of its power, if you will, at this point. And this 2-episode story, for a lot of people, is sort of the definitive sitcom goes to Disney parks set. And quite frankly, because it kicks off the ABC era of that, I don't think it's any secret why.
Yeah, no, this kind of stuff is all the common tropes you would see in other Disney park, I guess, episode specials. I also think that is a bit more clear here just because of how simple Full House is just a show in general.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It definitely plays to the strengths of Full House, one of which is never having to get too deep into anything because of constant change of which plot you're focusing on. Full House did a wonderful job for years of not only having an A and B plot, but usually a C and D plot in an episode that runs 20 minutes. There's something impressive about that. Pair of episodes are directed by Joel Zwick, who did a lot of work in sitcoms even earlier than the 90s, but would go on to a huge success as the director of My Big Fat Greek Wedding. It is written by the writing team of Dennis Rinsler and Mark Webb. They also pretty prolific sitcom writers. Two of their bigger successes later on would be Even Stevens and That's So Raven, which I think is significant because those are still, really associated with the Disney Channel and that sort of big over-the-top era of the Disney Channel where they were really cutting into Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network's business. Even Stevens, of course, launching the career of Shia LaBeouf as well.
The infamous Shia LaBeouf now. Back then he was just a small, sweet little boy in a funny comedy.
But I guess we could kind of just get into the plot here, and that'll lead us to some of our comments on the portrayal of the parks, how the parks are used within the show, and we'll highlight some of the things that they're highlighting that, as we said, there's quite a bit of advertising here, and some of the things that they highlight are really pointed in that direction. But a little change of pace. I'm going to go straight into this because, you see, Christian didn't grow up with this show, and the amount of names are kind of killing him. And though while he is far better at summarizing plot than I typically am, I'm going to go for it here. Basic plot. As we were saying before, Full House tends to run on about 4 plots per episode for a 20-minute show. So not room for a lot of character development in an episode, but you do get specific plots for almost all of the cast, so I'll just run through that way. Uncle Jesse and Aunt Becky are supposed to have a romantic anniversary that is taking advantage of Jesse and his band, the Rippers, being booked at Disney World. This device was used over and over and over again, especially in the later seasons, because they really like to get John Stamos to sing on camera. I agree. I think it's a good idea.
Wasn't there a whole big thing with John Stamos always wanting to sing too? Wasn't that his big like shtick back then?
I mean, he should always want to sing. He has a good voice. So that is your A plot. The rest of the family, I don't even think it's an A plot. There's no real A plot in these episodes. The rest of the family, of course, all sneak in, including Kimmy, who not part of the family, and her parents have offered a standing deal to pay for any vacation that they don't have to deal with her for. The running gag of her being annoying. So she is tagging along as well. Stephanie and Michelle start off the episode fighting. When they get to Disney World, they are still fighting. Michelle cuts in line in front of Stephanie, the poor middle sister, as always. And Michelle is proclaimed princess for the day, something that does not really happen at the Disney parks, but I'm sure a lot of kids thought did. They do something, I believe they call them magic moments. This is one of the things that I should have researched and totally forgot to. But essentially, they will do stuff like that sometimes where they'll go like, hey, someone will be walking and they'll just say like, hey, now you get free fast passes all day. Things like that. That does really happen. And I think it rotates based on cast members. But this one is like a little extreme. Like basically Michelle can ask for whatever she wants.
Yeah.
Stephanie, already feeling like the middle sister, is pretty pissed about this. The older sister, DJ, is missing her boyfriend, Steve, and keeps seeing Steve over and over again, portraying different characters in the parks. The cool thing about that is really funny. They must have promoted this at the time. I did read that they had promoted these episodes really heavily on the Disney Easter Parade, which was a pretty big deal in that era. Scott Weinger, who plays Steve, was the voice for Aladdin in pretty much all of the major Aladdin media at the time, including the feature film. He was not the singing voice. He was the performance voice for the acting parts there. So there's a little bit of a joke there that he is kind of a Disney prince, even beyond DJ seeing him everywhere. There's also another plot where Danny and his girlfriend, Vicky, and Danny has repeated attempts to propose to Vicky. This is a big deal within the show because, up until this point, and really the impetus of the show, quite frankly, was supposed to be him being the widower and bringing in all of his extended family to help with the kids. So it is a big plot point. Arguably one of the biggest in the entire series gets to take place within these episodes. I don't think that was unintentional at all. Uncle Joey is there too, doing the radio show with Jesse, but also visiting the animation studio, and that leads to a very wacky sequence with some good Disney animation thrown in. All of the action here taking place in a couple of resorts and the 3 parks at that time. Magic Kingdom, at that time Disney MGM Studios, and Epcot. There's a lot of little touches here that talk about the parks. Christiaan, does anything stand out to you as far as that goes? Because I know, you don't have the somewhat psychotic interest in theme parks that I do. And I was wondering what stuck out to you and if what I thought they were pushing really comes across.
Well, I've been to pretty much all the Disney parks at this point, except for California Adventure, due to various regions. But I like stuff with the magic moments and things like that. I think that happens more in Disneyland right now. I think at Disney World it's so like populated that it's hard to do that.
Well, nothing happens at Disneyland right now, but
yeah. But like when I went to Disneyland in like 2016, they would give us like special stuff. We went on a day of the anniversary of Star Wars, and they had like lightsaber churros we could eat and shit like that, and it was really like cool. I never really saw that at Disney World though, and I've been to Disney World many, many, many times. Mostly because my parents work and they travel a lot, and in about the mid 2000s, her company like to really book vacations for the summer in the Disney World resorts. So I've been to the Disney World resorts many times, and I never really saw close to anything that they portrayed in this. But this is supposed to be the most idealized possible version of the Disney parks, and that you get to meet Mickey and Donald and Goofy and all your favorites pretty immediately, and that just doesn't happen now. You have to have like passes, and it's like insane. What I did also see them kind of portray is that Disney World is kind of like a safe park. One moment that stood out to me pretty clearly was Snow White finding the kid and kind of like taking her back to her parents. I think that's a really nice moment, and I think that's somewhat reflected in the Disney World parks as well. The big Aladdin moment, I remember occasionally things like that, but it was never as extravagant as how they portrayed it in Full House.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you pulled that out. Yeah, that is one of the really cool things about Disney. While it probably isn't going to be Snow White who would help a little kid, things like that do happen, and they're incredibly good about making stuff like that work and making sure that the kids are comfortable. And um, you were talking about the characters themselves. I think that's something we can pull out of this. That's definitely going to show up a lot going forward in this feature. The characters are the characters in the episode. No one is violating the idea that no one is like acting like these are people in costumes. Even to the extent of Chip and Dale at one point eating like an entire meal out of a picnic basket somehow. Um,
Well, I think they almost broke that character for a second when they first arrive and they're making fun of about like doing tea and everything, and then everyone shoots death glares at at Uncle there, and that kind of stood out to me. I also was surprising that no one broke their character. Like they all referred to them as the characters' names and things like that, even if it was like a weird, dry, ironic sense of doing it.
what's weird too, though, is that I don't know if this has been in your experience. That's kind of how it is in the park too, where like you walk by someone who's in a genie costume, you don't address them like someone who has to stand in like 90-degree weather in a costume. You just act like they're the genie.
Yeah, I think that just has to do with the atmosphere of the park. Like, even though you might not specifically believe is the character, uh, I guess there's like a sense of politeness that kicks in, oddly enough, that you don't want to like ruin it for anybody else. And I guess on some level, you want that person to be that character too.
Right, and they're always very good about casting people who are really able to embody their version of those characters. And I think that's another strength that the parks have. Speaking about those characters too, as you were saying, they just kind of run into the characters as the plot goes on. These days, that's not so much the case. Meet and greets are pretty controlled. They used to be a little less controlled. I can tell you from being a kid in the early '90s going to Disney World. But I remember hearing, I think on a podcast or one of the many very well done videos that you can find on YouTube, that part of the reason for that became camera phones, and now everyone having a camera ready at all times. Putting someone in a costume into the middle of a crowd doesn't work anymore because everyone's going to crowd around them. There used to be, slightly less interest in that because you might not be willing to do that. Now it has to be a little more controlled because if it isn't, it's just going to be kind of chaotic.
That's interesting. I did not think of it like that. I also thought it was just like I always knew they would get mobbed, but I know people always mention like in the early days of Disneyland, like characters would just walk around, and you saw that a little bit when they opened Star Wars Galaxy Edge. They had like Rey and the stormtroopers walk around, and when I went to Disneyland in like 2016, they did have like stormtroopers walking around, and I think as just like how many people visit these parks, they just can't like do that anymore. Just like physically, you can't have a whole battalion of stormtroopers or all the ducks walking down the street because there's just too many freaking people now.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of the context too, where that internal storytelling of the parks kicks in. I was at Galaxy's Edge early in 2020 when in California actually, and they certainly did have the characters walking around freely, but they were part of the story. Things were moving. It wasn't like Kylo Ren was standing there waiting for pictures. He would blow by you, and you might be able to like get a picture if you get in the right position. So I think that maybe is how they're going to kind of control that, where they can have that element of surprise again, but not create insanity. And I'm sure they watch how full the areas of the park are, and wouldn't put one of those performers into a situation where they're just going to be mobbed.
I guess to tie this back in a bit more to Full House, I was surprised how one of the subplots was them being in the parade. I can't imagine that happening anymore.
It's funny you bring that up, because that's one of the other things I wanted to move on to with these episodes here. I noticed something very distinct about the rides and attractions that were being mentioned. First off, we were speaking about that Aladdin prop, that giant genie that is used in the beginning of the episode, and then part of the reward is being in the parade, which also features the giant genie. That was one of the most popular attractions at that time in Disney World. It was called Aladdin's Royal Caravan, a very complex parade with a lot of puppets, modeled after the Prince Ali scene in Aladdin. A really big draw. You can tell it was a really big draw because it ran for a few years, and that is generally not the case with most parades. The legendary electric parade aside. So that was very much an intentional thing to promote that parade. Aladdin, obviously huge at the time as well. Very, very intentional marketing with the use of that parade. I would say the other side of that is the slightly older sister, Stephanie, constantly wanting to go on Splash Mountain. Splash Mountain being one of the rides of the Eisner era where he was very distinctly trying to go after a slightly older crowd with a thrill ride. It also was fairly new at Disney World at that point. It probably was extremely new when they were shooting. This aired in May of 1993. It didn't open until October of 92. So they might have been there like right when that opened.
Yeah, it kind of seems like it. I was also surprised not just that they showed off Splash Mountain, but they didn't show off like Space Mountain. Many of the other rides that were there, they only really showed off like the carousels and the Dumbo ride. And I wonder if that had to do with like them trying to build out the park at this point too, because a lot of the Disney parks were going under renovation at this point as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a big time of change. You see a little bit of the Toon themed Mickey area. I think they were very much trying to show how modern the park was. A Disney park suffered quite a bit in the early 80s under the perception that they were sort of old fashioned. This is not all that long after that. And I think though things were definitely improving for Disney, this is still a big deal to them to make the park look cool.
Yeah, I also think another part was that when they showed off, they were showing off a lot of the resorts as well, not just like some of the stuff in the parks, but they showed off a lot of the Magic Kingdom resort, and they showed off a bit of the Epcot resort, which was also like a huge Eisner project at the time. I so, and it kind of struck me when they were showing off the resort, they were always trying to shoot it outside and make it seem like, oh, it's very nice and very warm, very safe and everything too. And the resorts were a bigger part of my stays at the Disney area just because, like I said, I went on a lot of business trips. So I stayed at a lot of the resorts, but I never stayed at the Magic Kingdom resort. That's always been the most popular out of all of them.
Yeah, the two, the Contemporary and the Grand Floridian, right outside of the Magic Kingdom, two of the most popular and, frankly, most expensive in the park, or I should say, in the resort. They were highlighted quite a bit. It is a really pretty area of the resort, and I think that was appropriate. Let's talk a little bit about the plot moving forward. In her frustration with her sisters, Michelle runs away, something that we mentioned before. and is found by Snow White, who assists her, but first takes her to a character dinner so she can realize she wishes her family was there. Jesse, after being stuck underwater, is late for his anniversary, but he sings a song and gets his way out of it. Pretty awesome. DJ continues to see Steve until Steve shows up. And Danny does propose to Vicky. Like I said, huge moment in the show, really ending the original basis for the show. They made it clear that these were going to be big episodes at the time, and I was young when this came out, but the fact that I remember that is probably a good indicator of how much they were advertising. It also, I think, for my generation, was one of the first times you got that sort of new image of Disney World, and they were pushing it, as we were saying. Like, they wanted people to know it was cool, that they were putting in a lot of new stuff, a lot of new technology. That Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular still intact at the park, not running at the moment because of how much they've had to cut back on actors, unfortunately, but something that I cannot think would not come back unless they have something really big they're going to replace it with. A real hallmark of Disney's Hollywood studios, even with Galaxy's Edge and Toy Story Land now there. And it all ends with, pretty happy endings, pretty much everything stable. But yeah, that Danny-Vicky engagement is a big deal.
Yeah, even though I'm not super familiar with Full House, like I've watched it many times late at night when I was supposed to be in bed. But even I knew that like Bob Saget's character was supposed to be the sad, single, divorced dad. Well, he's not divorced in this, but the same sort of
The
energy. And so, like, even when I was going into this, watching this, I never saw this episodes, oddly enough, even despite how often I was watching this show. It did kind of surprise me that they were willing to do this 6 seasons into the show. Usually that's when they do a lot of, like, shift tonal changes in a show, usually around season 6, but still it was quite surprising to see him actually, like, do the proposal and everything.
Yeah, a big moment. We start to wrap this up. One thing I do want to talk about is this also starts something that drove me nuts as a kid. And, no shock that I really like structure and things if you've listened to any of the show. But it always bothered me that on this show and a lot of the other sitcoms, they don't act like Epcot, Disney's Hollywood studios now, then MGM studios and the Magic Kingdom are separate, that you can just kind of get to anywhere really quickly. That is not the case in Disney World. You got to hop on a bus and get over there, and they make it easy for you to get there. But yeah, this is the first time you see that too. I'm highlighting that because my favorite of the Disney World, Disneyland episodes does not do that, and so I'm going to mention it right now. So when we get to that one, I can talk about how much I love that they don't do it. Episode ends with Jesse and the Rippers playing in the Magic Kingdom, doing a cover of A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes, bringing back, even at that time, really nostalgic feelings for Disney, which I think is a really cool way to end a 40-minute advertisement.
Yeah, they get there really quick. They get there in like the first 3 minutes of the episodes, huh?
Yeah, I think it's successful. It is a fun episode. There's a lot of good gags. It's Full House, so nothing risque. Like Joey going into an underwater audio studio to do his show, and then realizing there are sharks there and being scared. That's all good fun.
Yeah, like the tiniest sharks in the world.
And then I like the whole gag about the pizza getting delivered down there thing. I thought that was all good. Any final thoughts on this episode?
I really like the animation sequence in this. It's like I said, I kind of went into this blind, and seeing that animation sequence, that's a really gorgeous animation sequence. Even though if the acting's not great in it, you can kind of tell he's not looking at anything, and just occasionally adding really awkward laughs in between.
Yeah, that'll make more sense if you watch the episode and haven't seen it, because he's staring at like an animated picture. The height of Disney animation we're in the middle of at this point. Not having an animated sequence probably would have seemed wrong. Though later on they do focus more on the parks. This allowed them a little bit of a way to promote the animation as well. I agree. I think that sequence is really well done. I think they do a really good job of capturing some of the prettier places in the resort. And as you're saying, Full House, one of the best ever at keeping it light, keeping it moving, and getting to the end of the episode. So I think it's a success all around.
Yeah, it's Full House is kind of interesting just as like it is basically the prototypical like sitcom. It is like devoid of any conflicts whatsoever. And it's like it really makes it for like really easy breezy watch. And I think it stands in like really big contrast to like every other like possible sitcom out there.
I would agree. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this edition of Dissecting Fiction Goes to Disney World. We're going to do this pretty consistently. You guys seem to like the Disney stuff. We like the Disney stuff. This is a good way to talk about both sort of 90s culture until we get past that and Disney culture. So I'm excited. If you are looking for some vintage 90s Disney toys, be sure to check out toystoreguide.com. A lot of great independent businesses in your area are on there, and they could really use your support. Be sure to support all of your local businesses as much as you can these days. If you're looking for more Dissecting Fiction, we're all over. Just type Dissecting Fiction into Google with your preferred social media. I'm sure we'll pop up. We're on most major podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube, Facebook. People really like us on Facebook right now, so if you want to check that out, that would be good too. Any final thoughts, Christian?
Yeah, check out. I'm assuming if you're watching Full House, you have Hulu. So check out Legion. It is a kind of X-Men spinoff about the X-Men dude named Legion, and is an interesting, cool show.
Yeah, and if you're an international listener, that's going to be available on Disney Plus Star pretty soon. We here in the U.S. are not getting Star. We have to stick with Hulu for now. But every region except for the U.S., I believe, is getting Disney Plus Star for their adult content from Disney.
Great, love it.
But that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with significantly more sitcoms going to Disney, and I'm trying to find a good version of something very special for both Christian and I to watch and discuss that predates this a little bit. We'll see if we can get it. I'll give you a hint that it's something that Disney now owns, that at the time they were kind of playing with buying. But I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christian Kutlick.
And we'll see you next time.